Can you imagine leading a world championship for 6 months and suddenly your car starts to fail without explanation, just when you need it most? What if you later discover that it was not a simple mistake, but something much more serious? What Oscar Piastri revealed after Mexico can change everything at McLaren. When they arrived in Mexico, the situation was already critical. The difference in performance between Piastri and Norris was so abysmal that many media outlets began to speculate about personal, psychological problems or even a lack of motivation for the Australian driver. The reality was much more sinister. During practice sessions at the Autodromo Hermanos Rodriguez, Piastri struggled with a car that simply wasn't reacting as it should. It was not a lack of pure rhythm, but a total disconnection between his commands as a driver and the car's responses. It was like driving a foreign, unknown vehicle. His feeling was helplessness. Steering corrections had no effect, cornering was unstable and braking was unpredictable. No configuration seemed to restore his confidence. The key moment was the classification. The difference with Lando Norris was 0.6, an eternity in Formula One terms. For any casual viewer, that could be explained by a bad day, by a mistake on the lap. But those who knew Piastri's surgical precision knew something was deeply wrong. Even Carlos Sainz, after receiving a penalty, overtook him on the grid, and the mental damage began to be as great as the technical damage. Piastri's subsequent statements froze the atmosphere at McLaren. His tone was that of a driver who no longer trusted his car, but also, between the lines, that of someone who was beginning to not trust his team. "I feel like I've done some decent laps, but everything seems to be 4 or 5 tenths slower," he said. In other words, Piastri was signaling that he had done his part, that the problem was not with him. For a young pilot, this type of frustration can be destructive, but it can also be the turning point, because from that moment on, it was no longer just a fight against the stopwatch or against his teammate. It was a fight to regain control of his own destiny. And what I still didn't know was that I was about to discover that this drop in performance had a very specific, very technical, and deeply alarming cause. The collapse was not the result of chance. It was the first act of a much darker story, where the margins of error became betrayal, and where the team's silence hurt more than the defeat on the court. The mystery surrounding Oscar Piastri's collapse in Mexico was not resolved on the track, nor in front of the cameras. It was revealed in silence, at the back of a garage illuminated by artificial light, with McLaren engineers surrounding the MCL39 number 81 in absolute stealth. While the world speculated about driving failures, psychological wear or strategic errors, the Woking technical team delved into an in-depth inspection of the car that would completely change the narrative. That's where everything fell into place. What they found was as tiny as it was devastating. An internal microfracture, invisible to the naked eye, lodged in the hydraulic actuator of the pressure valve of the rear suspension system. A detail that in any other category of motorsport could go unnoticed, but that in Formula One represents the line between glory and failure. This component, one of the most delicate in the car's technical ecosystem, is responsible for regulating the behavior of the rear suspension in real time. Its function is to constantly adjust the height of the car in tenths of a millimeter, ensuring optimal distribution of aerodynamic load during critical phases such as braking, cornering, and acceleration. Without it, the car loses its connection with the asphalt, loses his soul. The damage was subtle but enough to upset everything. During the most aggressive braking on the Mexican circuit, especially in turns 4 and 11, the hydraulic pressure fell below the ideal threshold. This generated a delay of just milliseconds between the commands that Piastri sent from the steering wheel and the response of the suspension. These fractions, invisible in real time, translated into an unstable, nervous car that required constant corrections and destroyed the driver's confidence lap after lap. What was most disturbing was the way the failure manifested itself. Silent, intermittent, treacherous. It was not a fault that raised alarms or was registered as critical in the live systems. It was a mechanical collapse covered up by routine. Real-time telemetry barely caught it. Only when the data was analyzed in depth, cold, did the pattern reveal itself. A car that behaved well for one lap, but was unpredictable the next lap. The location of the glitch was only part of the revelation. The environment where it occurred made it an even bigger disaster. The Hermanos Rodriguez Autodromo is located at more than 2,200 meters of altitude. This extreme condition alters every parameter of the car. Air density drops, engines run hotter, fluids expand differently, and sensors lose precision. It is the perfect scenario for a microfracture to become a catastrophe. Andrea Stella, team leader, explained it with unusual clarity. He admitted that the Mexican altitude had exposed a structural weakness in the MCL39 hydraulic system that had never before manifested itself with such violence. The words were technical, but the message was clear. Piastri's car had been broken down, and no one had detected it until it was too late. The magnitude of the discovery was not only mechanical, but symbolic. McLaren, one of the most meticulous and perfectionist teams on the grid, had failed to protect its driver at the most crucial moment of its title fight. There was a damaged component, yes, but the real damage was to trust. Because when a team does not identify a failure of this level in time, it leaves its driver exposed not only to its rivals, but also to public doubt. This microfracture not only destabilized the car, it opened a crack in the team's internal narrative. And for a driver like Piastri, who had demonstrated surgical precision all season, this revelation was like a silent stab. What hurt the most wasn't the loss of points, but the fact that deep down he knew he never had a real chance in that race, that the car betrayed him, and he did it in silence. What began as a technical anomaly soon turned into an internal earthquake within McLaren. The discovery of the microfracture in the hydraulic actuator not only shed light on Oscar Piastri's inexplicable performance in Mexico, it also lit a silent fuse that was about to detonate from within. And it was Piastri himself who chose not to remain silent. During the days after the Grand Prix, while the team tried to contain the narrative with technical explanations, the Australian driver chose to speak with unusual crudeness. His tone was not aggressive, but neither was it complacent. It was the tone of someone who no longer wants to be invisible in decision-making. I want to understand why these types of mistakes are repeated. You can't fight for a title if every time it matters, the car abandons you. That phrase, thrown without filters, resonated like a projectile in the corridors of Woking. Because what Piastri was saying wasn't just a criticism of a specific ruling. It was a declaration of principles. A warning. The driver who until then had been the serene and obedient face of the McLaren project, now demanded answers. Not only because of what happened in Mexico, but because of the pattern that was beginning to emerge. Failures at critical moments, uncomfortable silences from the wall, ambiguous strategic decisions. And this is where the tension escalated to unprecedented levels. Internally, the technical team was divided. Some engineers argued that the failure was unforeseeable, an unfortunate consequence of the extreme conditions at altitude. But others, quietly, admitted that the signs were there from Austin, that the telemetry already showed abnormal behavior in the rear suspension. And perhaps, not wanting to alter the internal dynamics or call into question the reliability of the MCL39, they chose to ignore them. In a structure like McLaren, these kinds of errors do not go unnoticed. Even less so when the other car, Lando Norris's, didn't present any problems. The favoritism narrative, which until then was just a fan theory on social media, began to seep into internal conversations. The difference in treatment between both sides of the garage became an uncomfortable topic. Was the most popular driver prioritized? Was Norris protected with a more supervised car? Or was it just bad luck? Piastri did not say it openly, but he didn't do anything to deny it either. The reaction of Tom Stallard, his career engineer, was perhaps the most humane of all. During a technical meeting after the GP, he broke the silence. He admitted that since Friday's free practice, they already knew that Piastri's car was not working as it should, that they asked him to adapt, to try different driving styles to compensate, that he would try to drive like in Austin. But in reality, there was no way to solve the problem from the cockpit. They knew it, and they still sent him to the track. The damage was done. And it was double. Because not only a career had been committed, the pilot's trust had been violated. A trust that is fragile and that, in Formula One, is worth more than any aerodynamic component. When a pilot feels that they are not being taken care of, that they are not being listened to, their performance not only drops, their loyalty begins to erode. The consequences began to be felt immediately. Piastri called for a complete review of technical verification procedures prior to each GP. Requested direct access to telemetry analyses, and he demanded clarity in making strategic decisions shared with Norris. It was a clear sign. He was not willing to continue being a passenger in his own car. I wanted control. I wanted guarantees. In parallel, McLaren management faced a complex dilemma. Andrea Stella had to balance an internal situation that threatened to fragment the most solid project of the post-Red Bull era. Because while Piastri demanded responsibility, Norris continued scoring points without setbacks. And the media was already smelling a dangerous narrative. Two very high-level pilots silently facing each other with a team divided into two trenches. And in this environment of unresolved tension, a new question arises that still floats in the paddock. Can McLaren sustain this structure without breaking from the inside? Or will this rift between driver and team be the first sign of the end of an era that was just beginning to flourish? Do you think McLaren was negligent? Or simply the victim of an inevitable technical misfortune? Is Piastri within his rights to demand more, or have his statements unnecessarily strained the team's internal structure? Let me know in the comments what you think about all this.